Now, moving on to our guest, Jem, thank you so much for joining us on this call. Before we jump into the AMA, I wanted to ask you just a little bit about your journey into tech. A lot of the developers that do come into Mintbean are trying to break into the industry, so they're fairly new. Um, either at the year zero mark or somewhere between 0 and 3. So just, tell us a little bit about how you started and how you broke into the industry and sort of how you got into the current role at Netflix.
Yeah. First off, thanks for having me. Hello, everyone. Good morning, depending on where you are in the world. I'm here in Oakland, California. It is, 10:05 a.m. Yeah, it's Wednesday. It's a beautiful day. I always say the day because when you speak internationally, sometimes it's Thursday for some people already. Anyways, yeah, that's a big question about how I got to where I am, and we'll probably take it in chunks because it's a long journey. I could say it in 5 minutes, again, 30 minutes. To start, I've always had a passion for computers. To me, they make sense. People are complicated. People, they have different motivations, different rules they abide by, different ethics, different backgrounds. But computers, I think we all agree. There's only three backgrounds for computers. There's Mac, Windows, and Linux, right? And those are actually just two of those are Linux. So once you understand that, it's pretty easy. But from an early age, I've always been into computers. Probably from 8 or 9, I've been tinkering around on the old Apple IIe's. If you hold Shift when you start up the computer, you can actually get more RAM. It like doubles your virtual RAM. And ever since then, I was like, what? You can get more RAM just by doing this? And I didn't even know you can manipulate computers in that way. And that was how it started. Uh, in junior high or middle school, depending on where you're from, I was kind of the terror a bit because I would mess around on networks. And this was way before, this was kind of pre big internet. I'm dating myself now, but this was before you can just look up things on how to do things. You had to like mess around and figure it out yourself. And I caused some havoc on the school network. I took it down several times. I organized games of Doom over the network during class. I was not a troublemaker. I was just very curious and didn't have anywhere to direct that energy. Uh, and then from there, I moved on to programming calculators. So TI-83, TI-84s, the standard graphing calculators we use in school. And I started programming those because I was bored, and I learned that you can make really simple games. And the code is so easy. It's like just if statements, jump statements, loops. Actually, I don't think loops were a thing yet. Yeah, so it was really simple programming, and I just had a lot of fun with it. And then from there, my mother took me to kind of a university demo day, and I was there just talking to people. Like these are college kids, and I was still like, early high school. And I was talking to these two guys, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we do computer science," and I was like, "What's that?" Like, oh, it's kind of the science of working on computers and understanding how they work and trying to become more efficient and programming them in an efficient way that gets more work done. And I was like, wait, computer science is a thing? They're like, yeah. I was like, I've never heard of that. Now I know what I want to do. And this was like, maybe I was 14, 15 at that point. And right then I knew that I was going to go to school to study computer science because that just made sense to me. Forget all those earlier dreams that people had of, what's the ones we all have? Marine biologists. At some point in your childhood, you probably want to be a marine biologist or a veterinarian or I don't know we all have these childhood dreams about
Shows
like what our careers going to be.
Disney shows that get you early, like that. Flipper was it for me. I don't know if anyone watched Flipper, but yeah,
Jessica Alba Flipper?
yeah.
Oh wow, all right.
But I honestly I should say now I acknowledge the role that luck has played in my life. I don't think enough successful people do, uh, especially when you do like AMAs or magazine interviews or something. It's always like, well, it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of perseverance and That's all true. That is 100% true. You have to put the work in, but luck plays a factor into all of the things we do, and I think it's important we all acknowledge that and just say like, yeah, sometimes you have to get lucky, but hard work does increase your luck potential. But it's just a thing. I like to throw that in, and I'll keep saying it because I think we should all understand we're not all playing on the same playing field. Because I don't want anybody to get discouraged. It's really easy to hear success stories and be like, aha, that's not me. But it can be. So I got really lucky in meeting these people at the right time, right when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life, or trying to, plot my path ahead, even though I was only like 15 years old. So I got into computer science and I went to school, and I knew that I was going to study computer science. There's no undecided majors or anything like that. It was definitely this track. This was the one for me. It was the path to success. And things were going well until I failed out of school in my first year. Like, here's my grade point average, and it just went like this into nothing. There are many reasons for that. I would attribute that to just not being mature enough at the time to be in school, just not being in the right mindset, having too much assumptions about my future success because of the major that I chose. This was a time when computer programming was like just starting to take off, and I'm already thinking of visions of my Ferraris and Lamborghinis that I was going to drive, being a world-class programmer. So that is a lesson there, and sometimes you can look too far ahead and you forget where you are right now, and it's like, oh yeah, there's a mountain over there we need to climb, we need to focus on. Cool. But right now there's a hill we need to climb, and if we don't get over this hill, we'll never get over that mountain. And oftentimes we lose ourselves looking too far down the path. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I failed out of school. Fortunately, my mom was a good person and very patient. I'm the third of four. So I think by now, this time, she's kind of used to like, yeah, my kids are smart. They'll figure it out. Uh, but I moved back in with my mother, which, once you leave the house and come back, it's the ultimate walk of shame. It really is. But I've got amazing parents and an amazing mother. And she's like, well, you just work hard, and how about you go back to school? And that's what I did. I worked for about 7 years, working in a restaurant. And from there I learned, one, I don't want to work at a restaurant for 7 years or any more years. Two, I want a job where I don't have to be on my feet, if at all possible. Three, I can go back to school now more focused, and I understand now that you have to pay the cost early on. You have to put in the work, you have to put in the time, you have to put in get the motivation. But once you do that, you can see success. But there's no shortcut. There's no. I know I said luck is a factor, and it is, but you can't get lucky unless you put in the work. It's as simple as that. And that's an expensive lesson I learned, and it cost me a few years of my life to learn that lesson. But that's okay. So I went back to school, and I went to community college at first, which was actually a better route for me. I passed my math classes, which were something I've never been great at. But I had an amazing teacher and ended up getting an A in calculus, an A in calc 2, an A in the advanced math classes, simply because I had a really good teacher. And that's another lesson I learned there early in life is you can go so much farther if you connect with the right people. Oftentimes, if you have a skill gap or something you're missing, try to find the right person who understands you and will put in the work to help you and, pull you up. And when I look back at my career, in my life in general, it's been a series of those stories of just the right person in the right moment who helped me out. So I had a really good math teacher, finally got over those math classes that just really blocked me on my degree, transferred to a 4-year university, finished my computer science degree, and then started my first job at a software engineering company. And I'll pause there because that was a really long rant. I haven't even gotten to Netflix or anything yet, but yeah, that's my journey.
No, I think it's sometimes really important to actually put things in context. And I actually think that when you're young, the concept of knowing what you want to do at 14 is very different from reality. And so a lot of people are very hard on themselves for either We get a lot of individuals who are transitioning in Mintbean that are transitioning as software developers, and they picked a different path, and now they're trying to break into a new industry. And what my philosophy on that is, when you're like 16 years old and your counselor, your high school counselor, or your parents are telling you like, hey, pick a stream, and you don't there's only so much about the world, right? um, from like television, entertainment, or whatever research that you've done on your own, academia, teachers, and all that stuff. So you end up picking something, but you don't really know what it's like. So until you actually go in and explore and are working in the field, you actually don't even know if you're going to end up enjoying it or not. So I, from my experience as an employer and my personal experience, is when you pick something a little bit older in life, you're sure about yourself. You know yourself a lot better than you knew yourself at 16 or 14. So, you know what you like, you know what you don't like, and you know your strengths as well as your weaknesses. So I actually really related to that story. I took a pause in university as well, and and ended up sort of like wasting 2 years. But it was good because I wasn't ready. I needed that. I wasn't focused. So I understand that really well. And then there's another thing that you mentioned that I wanted to touch on. You talked about your teacher. So mentorship, I think, is something that it's not just in software, but I think like in almost every single field, if you can find that mentor, it is such a life-changing experience of having someone that guides you. Like there's just so many things in this industry. It's not just front end, back end, data science, but there's so many like frameworks, technologies, libraries, and niches like developer advocacy, or just there's a lot, sales engineering. There's so much that one can explore, and having a mentor can really change the conversation and accelerate your career. So
Oh, absolutely. We'll touch on this throughout everything, but networking and mentorship is so important. There's the myth of the software engineer who you give them a problem, they sit down in a room, and then 2 weeks later they come out with this brilliant, well-coded solution. And to a certain degree, I think the engineers that I know, the really deep technical engineers, that's kind of the fantasy we all play out, is like we're these great people who just code up these brilliant technical solutions. But in reality, engineering is a team game. It's a team sport, and you can get pretty far on your own actually as a software engineer. But if you're really going to be impactful, you have to work with other people. And the best way to do that is to find a mentorship and find a good team of people that will build you up and complement your skills. But also in that, you have to network. It's not enough to be the world's best JavaScript engineer, the world's best Python engineer. You have to network and you have to talk to people. And I really hate saying this because like people were telling me this for a long time in my life, and it just felt icky, like dealing with people, and it felt like transactional, and I didn't like that feeling. But at my age now, in my place in my career, I can tell you for a fact you have to talk to people. You will get much farther, and you will see more opportunities if you just connect with people and be like, hey, I'm blah blah blah, I'm so and so, I'm working on this, and establish a genuine connection. Now, that's not to say ping me on LinkedIn right now and be like, Jem, I want to connect with you. Like, I like to let these things happen organically, but finding a good mentor and having a good network of peers, of people that are also constantly striving too, is so important. I won't say critical. No, it is critical to your career, because the truth is, you are who your friends are, and that is a good life lesson I'm going to teach my son, and hopefully he'll teach his son. And it,
it is a good life lesson. I think I remember seeing this like really early in my life. You are the combination of the five closest people to you. So make sure that tight knit circle is, you pay attention to who you're spending your time with. I've heard this quite a number of times.
oh yeah, I can say in every job I've ever had, there's always been someone who I'm like, oh, let me learn what I can from this person. Usually it's the overly enthusiastic engineer who's they're always on about some new technology and they're always like hype train, hype train, hype train. And like you have to like kind of distill through that. But in there is wisdom and you can learn better newer technologies. When you have someone who will go on YouTube and take all the workshops and the courses and then who's willing to come back and distill that down for you, take it. Take that information because you can build off so much of that, but you have to make those connections first. And every job I've ever had, there's always been that person who's just like really excited about new technology. That's how I picked up, I got better at JavaScript. That's how I picked up React. That's how I picked up a lot of technologies was just, I found that person and I learned what I could from them. And then I moved on. And it's a pretty good strategy.
Absolutely. Mentorship is key. And also just to touch on that, I like the piece of letting mentorship happen organically because it is a two-way relationship. It's not just information being disseminated, but it's a relationship that you build with that person. So it's quite you grow as that person is they're teaching you and they're learning from you as well. It's not just them teaching you. So just remember that little piece.
And in that, and when you're trying to find a mentor, remember that someone who's going to mentor you has usually more experience or something that you want to learn from. They are taking a bet on you because there's a lot of people in the world. They can spend their time doing a lot of things, and this is true of the people that I mentor. Is I'm taking a bet on them that they're worth my investment. In that I'm not getting out of it anything necessarily. Like I'm learning too, but as far as my career, I'm not necessarily getting anything out of it. I'm just, you should always help the person who you can. But to that end, on the other side is you have to make yourself worth betting on. You can't cold email 50 people and be like, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'd really like your mentorship. Like, that doesn't work. And the people that I know that do mentors, it's not an effective strategy. But if you're like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I work on this, I've seen all your whatever, I follow your content, and you ask for specific advice, that's usually a good into getting a mentor. But if you say like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm a fourth year grad, or I just graduated boot camp, I need career advice, that's really hard for me to like take the time and be like, this person has something special, I'm going to bet on them. Because I get a lot of those requests. But if you ask for specific advice and you say, hey, I've taken this course, I've learned this, and right now, here's where I'm at in my career, and I'm really struggling to land that full-time job. Or I'm really struggling to move from junior developer to senior to mid-level developer. That's advice that's a person that I can look at and be like, okay, I can give them specific advice, and they're hungry enough to put in the work that they need. They don't just want some fortune cookie wisdom or magic bullet that will help them put their career at the next level. Like they're willing to put in the work. So yeah, if I had to sum it up in a tweet, make yourself worth betting on when you're trying to find a mentor.
Tweet it. I'll retweet it. Even though I'm not super active on Twitter, I'm the least active person on Twitter. All I do is retweet people. It's the most laziest way of being on Twitter. But speaking of being someone that you want to bet on, actually, that's a really interesting thing that you just mentioned because that's actually how we hire at Mintbean. Because we have a pretty active community. In the last year, we've hired 10 junior developers, and I can tell you that every single one of them that we've hired, we've felt a pulse on them inside the community. We're seeing that they're active, we're seeing that they're doing things, and it's not even like, oh, they're attending the learnathons. That's a great way for us to know that, hey, this person has grit. But we're seeing that they're helping other developers, they're answering questions, they're doing more. They're not doing it to show us anything. They're doing it because they want to learn, they want to grow, and they're showing up for themselves. And it just makes it so much easier to bet on them when you see that track record. So it's being part of micro communities and just showcasing your skills is a great way to connect with some of these mentors as well. But this is an AMA, guys. This is not just a conversation with Jem and Navi. I am going to unspotlight myself and Jem, and please feel free to jump on a video. I'm going to remove myself as a spotlight. Give me a second. It's just me. I don't know how to remove you as a spotlight person.
I can remove myself. There we go.
Yeah, so feel free to either ask questions in the chat or just kind of jump in and open up your mic and share your thoughts on some of the things that we've been talking about, or some other area that you want to explore.
It's always the first person. Like you need
Sorry.
a kickoff.
Oh. Hello. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Ken.
Okay. Hi. My name is Ken. So I hear that starting out in regards to I'm wanting to get into web development more specifically, and I've been having difficulties trying to figure out. My goal is to go in to try to get into React more specifically. And I know you need, or I've been told you need to start out with JavaScript. The problem I'm getting into is I'm right now stuck in the tutorial rut, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out that one project idea that's not copying someone else's idea in regards to it. And like, since I'm still starting out with JavaScript, the part I'm trying to figure out is what's necessary to go through and get started, or what projects are good to go with, because I've got 2 ideas for projects, but I have no idea where to start with them. I'm not sure if you heard that clearly, because my computer's not very great for speech over internet.
Yeah. So you're starting off in front end development. You're trying to learn that basic JavaScript so you can move to React, but you can't find the right project to get started, or you're stuck on tutorials.
I'm stuck on tutorials and finding the right project.
Yeah, I've been there. I've been there. So some tricks I've learned. One, never, if you have a project idea, let's say, I don't know, I'll pick Uber for cats. I always pick that one because it's silly. Let's say you want to build Uber for cats. So that means you need to build an iOS application, Android application, a web application, doesn't matter. The first thing you do is do not Google or do not look up the project you have, because someone's probably already done it, and that will often steal your motivation. And you're like, well, they already did it, so what else is there? Like, don't do that, because you can often get discouraged. I think, in my opinion, when you're starting off and you're trying to say, hey, I want to build something, but I'm not sure what I want to build, write them down. Write down some of the technologies that you're going to need to build them, and say, are these the things I want to learn? Because you're building to teach yourself. You're not building to have an end goal or be the best or the shiniest. Because if you do that, you will probably always lose, because there's probably someone else in the world who's already built it better than you. But that's not the point of this. The point is to teach yourself. So find the project you want to do and just build it, and don't worry about what other people have done. I know that that's super generic advice, but I've been in the exact same position, and I have an entire folder of projects that I've abandoned because I've started on them. I had this grand vision, and then I made a mistake of looking it up, and it turns out there's already 20 open source projects that do the same thing. And I was like, well, I guess I won't do that. And, it's like Alexander the Great, he wept because there were no more worlds left to conquer. Just remember why you're doing it, and you're doing it for yourself. Feel free to take some inspiration once you already get started from other projects, but yeah, build it for yourself and find that technology and find something you're passionate about. You can get stuck in tutorials because you'll think, well, what's the point? I don't understand what the end goal of this. is versus if you build something for yourself, it doesn't matter what the end goal is. It can be whatever you want.
Okay, that does make absolute sense. Thank you very much.
Oh, no problem, Jen. Good luck.
Like we say around here, focus on the code and the rest will sort of fit in itself. I don't want to make this about the learnathons, but of course that exists, but it doesn't really matter what you build at the end of the day. Honestly, it doesn't matter if someone's already built it. It doesn't need to be something that is unique. You just need to be building. That's it. Just as long as you're building, you're moving towards that goal.
Oh, absolutely, Navi. And I can tell you for a fact the only reason, well, one of the few reasons why I am in a position where I am now is because I spent many nights and weekends alone just building stuff because I, didn't have much of a social life. I did, but sometimes I come home and code a bit. But I just I had that lingering problem. I'm like, oh, if I can just get this one thing working, and then I can go out and enjoy myself. But I have the engineer brain where it's just like there's a nagging problem and I have to solve it and I can't go to sleep until I solve it. And you keep doing that over several months and years, and eventually you will become an amazing engineer. Like if you have that nagging desire, it will come through and you will become an amazing world-class engineer. But it's just that curiosity that you have to keep pushing yourself. And I know that's easy to say, but you can't force passion. So what I say is, like, if you say, hey, I really want to be in tech, I really want a good tech career, but I'm not passionate about coding, then maybe engineering isn't the way you want to go. Maybe you want to be a product manager. Maybe you want to be a UX expert. Maybe you want to be a backend engineer. Maybe UX design is more your thing. There, like you said in the beginning of the talk, there are many, many, many paths and areas, specialties in tech. It doesn't have to be software engineering necessarily. So find the place you're passionate about, and your success will follow, especially in something as wide open as tech.
Good advice. I want to go into the chat. Veronica has a question for you, Jem. Can you give any advice regarding technical interviews? Some of us are bootcamp grads with a little intro into CS fundamentals, working on the algos data structure curve.
Yeah. It's hard to give broad advice. My advice, this is, I promise I'll get to the question, but what I've been doing recently is trying to use my influence for some good. I have a course on front-end masters called Interviewing for Front-End Engineers. And in part of that, I cover how do you do an interview for a front-end engineer? Like, what are some of the things you're going to cover? How to do your resume, things like that. But I also cover how to give an interview, because we don't focus on that enough. It's wild in our community that we all agree technical interviews suck, and interviews in general suck. It's stressful, it's anxiety. You just don't know what you're going to get. You don't want to feel foolish. But we're the ones who give these interviews. We are the ones holding ourselves down, and it's just like this cycle that keeps happening. So one of the things I'm trying to do and push is, let's break this cycle of these terrible technical interviews with trivia questions and algo questions that aren't relevant at all to the role. And I say that to everybody listening today is, someday you will get your job, if you haven't already, and you will be in a position to interview someone. And just remember how it feels to be on that other side of the table. And I think if we have a bit more empathy towards each other, we can collectively move ourselves to the next era of front-end technical interviews. But until I see that dream of let's get rid of algo questions, unless you're specifically doing something that requires working in algorithms, my advice to bootcamp grads is ask ahead of time the type of questions they're going to ask. Most respectable companies and interviewers and hiring managers will tell you what the interview will be and the sort of questions you can expect. Excuse me. I haven't come across anybody that wouldn't tell me. And if they're like, well, it's a secret, that's kind of a weird, bad sign, because there shouldn't be any questions you can't know ahead of time. For example, I actually just finished a round of interviews at one of the big FANG companies because it's always good to keep your skills sharp. And I asked them, I said, well, what kind of questions can I expect? And the recruiter laid them all out exactly. They're like, this person's looking for this kind of skill, this person's looking for this kind of skill, and this person, you want to touch on these, and these, and tell some of the stories of your career. Yeah, you just ask most of the time, and they will tell you what's expected. And hopefully they do. If not, tell them Jem Young said, you should do better. But let's face it, there are some times when maybe it is, let's say, a back-end role doing a lot of data processing. In that case, yeah, there are some algorithms that I expect people to know. There are some basic kind of CS fundamentals that I do expect you to know, because the cost of implementing a loop incorrectly when you're processing, say, 1 billion items a day is very expensive, and it gets very I have taken down servers before because I wasn't paying attention to the memory complexity of the function that I was implementing, and it just ate up all the memory in Node, and it crashed the servers. This is at Netflix, by the way. So we all make mistakes. So with that regards, some of it's just practice. You just have to have seen it before and just have like a default implementation for it. For example, like quicksort, do I have that memorized? No. But could I look at some of the code I've written where I've written out quicksort before and be like, oh yeah, I wrote that. Yeah. And that's actually what I do, is I keep GitHub gists of every algorithm that I want to implement. And when it comes time to do a round of interviews, I just pull up all those gists and I'm like, oh yeah, here's quicksort, here's bubble sort. Why are these all sorting algorithms? Here's how to do binary search. But because I've written that code myself, that neuromuscular connection between your hands and your brains means that I remember what I wrote, and it just comes back naturally. And that's usually my advice to most people, is implement it yourself and actually write it out. Try not to cheat. Don't copy paste, because you don't learn anything by copying and pasting. And then do it yourself. And honestly, I have probably 20 GitHub code snippets from years of coding and interviewing. And every time it comes down to, oh, I want to do an interview, it's so helpful to have that giant list of things, of questions that I've already solved.
Good advice. I like the concept of doing it yourself, because sometimes I've seen where developers spend hours in leak code or hacker rank, and it's, I don't know how much of that is actually sticking. Sorry, Veronica, it was a two-parter question. She was curious if we could hear any of your own tech interview experiences.
Yeah, I've done a lot of tech interviews, and I've been on both sides of the table several times at different size companies. I'll admit, in the beginning, I was terrible at interviewing. I was well, I have the power now, so now I'm going to make you pay. Or kind of that mentality we adapt whenever we see a new person and they're like, please, may I have a job? And you're like, we'll see about that. And I have been a jerk in interviews, I'll admit it, like in the past, and I'm not proud of it. I've asked silly trivia questions that weren't relevant to the role. But, we all learn, we all make mistakes, and I don't do that anymore. So I apologize to anybody I've interviewed in a while. But some of my own interview experience it's exactly the same. If you treat people with empathy, if you remember what it's like to be on the other side of the table, to need the job, to really need it, and remember that these people are trying to, when I'm giving an interview, they're trying to impress you, and I want to hire them. And it's like my friend Brian Holt says, when you come to an interview, they want to hire you. You've made it this far. If you made it all the way to the onsite, you've gone through many rounds. People have looked at your resume, they've looked at your LinkedIn, they've talked to you. At that point, the company wants to hire you. And really, the worst thing you can do is give them an excuse not to hire you. So when it comes to interviews, it's the same advice everybody gives, but we have to repeat it again. Talk out your solution. Talk out loud, because I judge largely on intent. And not necessarily if you got the right answer, but if you were in the right direction. And I say, yeah, they made a mistake early on, but they're thinking means that they would solve this problem and a broad range of problems. But I can't know that if you don't talk out loud. Ask the interviewer to rephrase the question, or you rephrase the question back to the interview just to make sure that you understand what they're saying, and then there's no ambiguity there. And then ask questions during it. Don't what I've seen people fail a lot is they might rephrase their question. They're like, oh yeah, okay, and then they just like get to coding a solution, and then I just sit back and let them do it. But sometimes it's wrong, and hopefully I can guide them back to the right solution or the right direction. But I've seen people not listen to me in an interview. I said, like, are you sure that's the right solution? They're like, yeah. No, it is. And I'm like, are you sure? They're like, yeah. And they just keep going, forgetting that, like, it's a partnership here, and I am there to help them succeed. I want to hire them. But if people are making it difficult or they're not listening, then it's really difficult. Yeah, it's hard to give you the benefit of doubt when I don't know what you're thinking or you're not listening to the prompts. But yeah, I can go on about interviews all day. I don't want to focus too long on those.
There's a few questions coming up about Netflix, but before I get into that, there's a question about are there any communities events you recommend being a part of as a junior dev from Selena? Selena, Mintbean.
Communities. There's a few conferences I really enjoy, but I don't want to endorse anything specifically. But I can say this. React Rally. If you're into React Rally in Salt Lake City, it happens every year. Hopefully it'll happen this year. We'll see. That's probably one of my favorite conferences. It's so beginner friendly. Literally everybody, all the famous people you see on on tech Twitter or whatever circles you're in are probably at React Rally. A bunch of Netflix people go. It's just a really good community, honestly, and one of the best conferences I go to every year. It's one of the few that I attend almost every single year. So, but there are a lot of good conferences. Kind of find your vibe. Every conference has its own community and its own vibe, and just like find the one that works for you. It might be a bigger one, might be a smaller one, but and don't forget to network, but not in a grubby way. Don't be like, oh, Navi, where do you work? Oh, a tiny startup? Okay. Oh, Jem, where do you work? Oh, you work at Google? Okay, hey, Jem, how's it going? Like, don't be like that. Like, try to make genuine connections, and I promise that these connections over years and months will pay off. I never got to the whole Netflix story, but actually I got hired at React Rally. It was the very first one. I was giving my very first conference talk, and that's where I met my friend, but manager, Ryan Burgess, and Brian Holt, who are now both friends of mine, but they're like, hey, this guy seems fun. Let's like talk to him. And then I was like, I don't know who you are. I don't care about working at Netflix. I got my own problems here. But like, we just connected, and over the months and years, I ended up at Netflix through them. And that was just networking. It wasn't, I didn't do anything special. I don't know, was genuine.
Nice.
Hopefully.
I have a question about the conferences that you just mentioned. Conferences can get very expensive. So when you're trying to attend as just as a participant, what are some strategies that you can, maybe because you do attend a lot of conferences on behalf of Netflix, what are some ways that, just a normal participant can invent without spending $500 on some of these crazy conferences?
Oh, yeah, that's tough. As a disclaimer, I almost never do conferences for money. I just don't believe in that. It goes against what my principles. There are some larger conferences that if they're going to pay me, but it's usually give a workshop or like a keynote, and then I'll take the money because they're a for-profit conference. But I would say find not-for-profit conferences. Their tickets are always cheaper. The minute you get into for-profit and the large tech conferences, those are the ones that are attended by people from like Oracle and Google and Netflix, and those companies are paying. So those tickets are always going to be $1,000, $1,500 because the people themselves aren't paying. So try to find the smaller community organized conferences. They're going to be a little bit smaller. There's usually some sort of scholarship at most conferences I've been to that they give free tickets or something like that. You just need to ask and apply. And if they don't have it, send them a story or send them a note just saying like, hey, I'm a brand new grad. I'm really trying to break into the industry. I have $10 to my name, but I really think if I get into this conference, it will make a big change in my career. It's all people at the end of the day, especially at the not-for-profit conferences, and generally people will help you out.
Advice. Um, there's a question from Mark. Jem, I'm curious. So you talked about Netflix, your path into Netflix. How might that relate to advice for aspiring FANG engineers? Your take on the work culture and work-life balance at Netflix.
Yeah, there's a lot there. For anybody aspiring to be a FANG engineer, I know this is not going to be helpful advice at all, but probably don't aim. Make that your aim. It's good. Maybe eventually you're like, yeah, I'd like to try it just to see if it works for me. But if you have that one goal in mind, once you get there, and you will get there eventually, you put in the work, you'll get there. You'll see that it's not this magical land that you thought it was going to be. And then you'll look back at your career and probably miss opportunities along the way because you're so eager to get to the finish line. And you'll get there and be like, well, what do I do now? What's my career now? Uh, I always say be good at what you want to do. Like work at startups, be passionate, work at mid-sized companies. And if you get the opportunity to go to a FANG company, try it out. It's a different culture. It's not for everyone. I know excellent engineers who are like, I refuse to work at the large tech companies because I like the more personal vibe of a smaller company. I like the scrappiness of a really small company. So somewhere in there, you will find like your groove. I'll say that large tech companies, they're more impersonal. You won't gain a broader range of skills. You will become very good at one very specific thing. I once interviewed someone and they worked at Google and I said, "What did you do?" Or "What do you do?" And they're like, "Oh, you know Google Maps?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's pretty cool." They're like, "I work on the font rendering on the map." I was like, "Wait, so all you do is make sure that the text is aligned on the map properly?" They're like, "Yeah." And I'm not saying it's an easy job, but it's so specific that, how many skills can you grow out of that? Maybe a lot, maybe a little, I don't know. But that's what happens at a large tech company is you will become very siloed into a specific tech stack in a specific area of the business. Whereas a startup or a mid-sized company, you get a much broader range of experiences. So if you're starting out, I always say go for startups because you'll work harder, you'll have more personal connections, but you will learn a lot more. You'll become a jack of all trades and understand database and networking and all that because you have to, because there's only 10 people at this company. Versus when you get into like Google or Netflix or something, you're going to become like very skilled at one specific thing, which is fine, but it's not, if you're just starting off, it's probably not the best for your career.
Yeah, I think it's actually a really good thing to aim for FANG in your late, like sort of mid to later years, because then you get that title and you get, when you go into a FANG at a later stage, you're not doing that one specific thing, but you're sort of the challenges that you're solving are much more interesting than when you're just starting your career out, because you haven't proved yourself yet. So they're not going to trust you with some of the bigger challenges that the company is facing. Um, you know, um, we here at Mintbean proudly say that we're career catalyst to our engineers. We've had people that we've taken in that have gone into Shopify, Postman, and sort of the work. So we've sort of seen that, like, but even the individuals that have come in and gone to some of these great companies, they've been able to do that because they proved themselves, right? They didn't use this as a stepping stone, but it was sort of kind of like they knew that this opportunity was to learn and grow. So working for startups, like I wish when I graduated from university, like I didn't know about the startup world at all. Like it was like like this is prior to my software development. I call it my pivot, my before my software development pivot. Like I graduated from finance and like I just dreamed about banks. So I landed into corporate and I never even knew that there was this whole world of startups and how much I would have grown as an individual had I gone down that route. Coming back to the questions, um, Claude, question: knowing that you know now, what can you tell your younger self who was a new developer in the field in order to get to where you are now as efficiently as possible? I have some context behind this question that I'd be happy to share, but this is the meat of the question. Um, Claude, if you want to open up your mic and put some more context in that, please feel free to do that.
Yeah, the context is that's where I am at the moment. I'm a new dev who transitioned into the tech industry. And like every day I've been sort of just thinking about like how do I improve my skills? There are a lot of like resources out there. What do I focus on? I've been thinking about like the software architecture as well. Like how do I get like to like a senior dev's like scalability as efficiently as possible without necessarily like gaining that title. Like I'm more concerned about gaining skills, I guess, in the shortest amount of time possible. And there's more context behind that too, but that's like the gist of it.
Yeah, great question, Claude. This may not be what you want to hear. It's more of a spicy take, but when you're early on, there's a danger in focusing too much on being a senior engineer, because a lot of the work that I do and at levels that are about mine, the work I do is not related to code. It is related, but I don't code. Like, I'm writing docs, or I'm creating tests, or I'm creating frameworks, or I'm pulling together a bunch of different teams together to align on a common objective, and I have to write all that out. It's not what you think of when you think of software engineering, but it's glue work that needs to be done, and it's thankless work, but it's not really related to code, and I'm not necessarily becoming a better coder. I'm becoming a better software engineer, but I'm not becoming a better coder. So if you focus too much on becoming a senior engineer, there's a danger in you start taking on these things. You start taking on documentation and better communication, or just like creating templates for sending out emails or something like that. Like that behind the scenes glue work, it's good to do, but if you start too early on, you won't become a good enough coder. So there's a danger that I would say avoid that too much and focus on what do you want to be? Do you want to be the best coder? Cool. Then find a passion project and just build it out. And I promise you will learn so much along the way if you have that motivation. But if you're saying like, oh no, I really want to become the most efficient software engineer, as in I want to become like staff and principal level, which is at the level you don't code that much anymore. You do very high level work. If that's what you want to focus on your communication. Underrated skill in software engineering. This is a bit of an aside, but it doesn't matter if you're the world's best coder or the world's smartest engineer or whatever. If you can't effectively communicate those ideas to others, you'll never get people to buy in, and they'll never adopt your ideas. So like they'll go nowhere. It doesn't matter if you have a cure for, well, I won't say cancer because that's kind of sad. And what would we be doing with that as software engineers? But it doesn't matter if you have like this brilliant technical solution that cuts response times in half or decreases memory storage allocation by a quarter. If you can't document that out and then share that and then get that implemented, it's not going to go anywhere. But if you do that really on in your career, it's not going to help you be the best coder you can be. So I would say don't focus as much on that level of senior engineering. Focus more on deep technical knowledge and being passionate about it. Because once you're passionate, you will learn a bunch because you'll make a lot of mistakes. But when you go to interview, all of that will come out. And you never know when it's going to be a question on like, hey, I actually got this interview question once. I was interviewing for Giphy in New York City. And they're like, hey, we ran this poll and we were trying to get real-time data from people. How would you do that? And I knew that I can use WebSockets or long polling because I had tried that in my personal projects and I knew all about that. And it just happened that I happened to know that bucket of knowledge. And that's usually how the best interviews go, is like there's a serendipity to it. But you can't ever get there if you're not curious and you haven't made a lot of mistakes, which means you have to code a lot. It's like if you want to be an Olympic athlete, there's no shortcut to it. You just have to put in the work. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not a silver bullet question, but Yeah, it's important to be truthful to me. At least I think that.
No, not at all. And I appreciate like you giving a different take on it. But I guess applying it to your own situation, would you have changed anything differently?
I would. If I could go back and tell my younger self, knowing what I know now, I would say be more disciplined. Discipline is superior to motivation. And I'm quoting somebody, but I forget who. But you can train discipline. You can become more disciplined, but you can't necessarily become more motivated. And historically, I've always relied on motivation, on my passions, to like get the job done, and just my curiosity in general. But there will be a point in your career, everybody will hit it, when you're just tapped out. You're just not curious anymore. You're burnt out, and that's where discipline comes in, and just saying like, hey, I'm going to code for 20 minutes a day on this project, and that's it. And then I'm going to leave it alone. And if you do that every single day, you will become a better engineer. Like hands down, there's no trick about it. You just become better at it. But you have to be disciplined about it. And that's one thing I wish I was better at in my early career, was just being disciplined and focused rather than relying on my just pure motivation.
Yeah. Thomas has a question for what's the most common, I know we kind of touched on this a little bit before. What's the most common interview questions for front-end devs? Also, what's your favorite question to ask?
Honestly, I don't know what the most common interview for front-end devs is. It's highly specific on the role. Back in the day, and by that I mean like 3-4 years ago, front-end development was like JavaScript and whatever the hottest frameworks were. Increasingly now, front-end development is more specific. So there's people who work on accessibility, there's people who work on web performance, there's people who work on UX design. So front-end is such a broad category now that odds are if you go into an interview, it's going to be something specific. So I really couldn't say like what the general question is. My favorite interview question is always, and will probably always be, how does the internet work? And because if I ask someone that, you can go anywhere you want. You can go as deep as you want to like hardware interrupts on the keyboard trigger things in the operating system, which send those commands into the browser, and the browser does this. You can talk about how the browser and packets work. You can talk about how TCP works. Or you can just talk at a super high level about like how web pages load. Or you can talk about how JavaScript gets rendered and all of that. You can go anywhere you want, but it's really, there's not a right answer to it. It's just like, if I ask you how does the internet work, I'm asking about how curious are you? And how deep have you gone? Are you just like, I want to work at Netflix, I want to work at a FANG company, and I've only focused my knowledge on that? Or I'm actually a really curious person, and like just through my ramblings and misadventures in coding, I've discovered all these weird things, and that's how I know how the internet works, is because I have just stumbled into it. But that question tells me so much about the person and their coding philosophy. So yeah, that's my favorite question.
Another Netflix question. So what are the tech stacks or skills that you would recommend to learn for those aspiring to work at Netflix?
Man, these are difficult because every team is its own company essentially, and we all have our own tech stacks, especially with containerized computing. That means we can all be on the same server, but this team's using React and Node, this team's using Java and Java Beans for some reason. I don't know. People still use Java Beans? Probably. And this team's using Ruby and Rails, but it's all the same company. So I couldn't give general advice on like which tech stack or skills or tech stack. Skills, that one's easy. Communication. I really can't stress this enough. You have to be a good communicator. Netflix has a policy is we don't hire brilliant jerks. So, and that's in our culture memo. You can't just be a good coder and say like, oh, I've solved these hard problems. Who cares? Like we've all solved hard problems at this level. Can you communicate effectively? Can you talk to partner teams? Can you talk to your peers? Can you explain complex technical subjects simply in a way that proves that you know what you're talking about? Those are the skills that are much more difficult to work on because it's hard to work on communication. There's no like check mark that says like good at communication. It's just something that you're always working on. But people that can have a deep technical knowledge but can explain that well are people that succeed at Netflix. Just hands down. It doesn't even matter if you know the tech stack or not. It's just, are you competent and can you learn? Are just like critical skills.
Really good advice, and we're right at mark, so we're at two. We're at two. That was the last question, but Jem, if you're open, we can take one more question.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I have any meetings and nothing's on fire. So yeah, I can do a few more, or yeah, one or two more.
Okay, so Nathaniel, do you have any tips on getting an interview when you don't hear back after many applications? How much does a degree matter after 4 years?
Uh, Tips on getting an interview when you don't hear back. I hear that from a lot of people. I run a private front end community with a lot of new devs and people trying to get work. Sometimes it's just a numbers game. You just have to put in a lot of numbers. It sucks, I know, but believe me when I say it's the first one is the hardest. Getting the first technical job is the most difficult one. I remember being there. I've seen people in the same situation. It's just gonna suck. That's just how it is. So I don't really have any tips there. But understanding that like I've been in that situation, we've all been there initially. To that end, the most efficient thing you can do is network. Like, what's better, me to cold apply to some job, or have someone that works at the company and say like, hey, you know, Navi, I vouch for her. She's a good software engineer. Like, that's much more efficient. She's an okay software engineer, but she's really friendly. That's far more efficient than just like trying to tweak your resume or I don't know, all the things we do to try to get noticed a bit more. Being involved in the community, having a community of people who, like Mintbean, who can help you out. And then when one person gets a job, they might say, hey, actually, there's 3 other roles in my company. Does anybody want first crack at it before we open it up to everybody on the internet? Because people always prefer to work with people that you have some sort of reference or they know. So if you're applying to a lot of jobs and it's just not working, try to network, try to find people at the companies you want to work at and then follow what they're doing and then find a way to make a connection with them because it's a much faster way of being noticed and getting in versus, you know, just hoping your resume has like a little bit something extra. The second question was, how much does the degree matter? I always say this, a CS degree helps you get your first job, and that's about it. I have a CS degree, so it's helpful to have that kind of baseline knowledge across many different subjects. But in my day-to-day, it doesn't make a difference at all. It only helped me get my first job, and that's probably about it. But as we were just saying, the first job is the hardest, so you could make an argument the CS degree is worth it because it cuts out a lot of that extra work you have to do. But, you know, it's up to your own journey and your path. When I look, I mean, I don't hire people, but when I'm on an interview panel, I don't look if they have a CS degree or not. It doesn't matter to me. I can figure out pretty quickly if they're a good engineer or not, regardless of their background. So, yeah.
I think a lot of hiring managers share that sentiment now. I talk to a lot of employers and they don't necessarily look at your pedigree. It's really about what skills, what you can prove, right? Also, I wanted to touch on that question of any tips when you don't hear back. That's a sign that something on your resume is not working. So either they're going to your GitHub or you're not coding enough. So there's a red. What we like to say in Mintbean is you're sort of you're giving them reasons to reject you, and they've identified something inside your resume on your LinkedIn or your GitHub that's not enough. And if more people than let's say if you're applying to 100 and only one person is getting back to you, that means there's something there in your profile that's not resonating. There's a few questions before we run out of time. I'm going to go right down the line. What does the onboarding experience look like for a junior developer at Netflix?
Netflix famously doesn't have junior developers. We have one level of engineer, and that's senior software engineer across the board. Doesn't matter if you have 20 years experience. Doesn't matter if you have 3. Uh, we have one level. I really enjoy that. We'll see how it holds in the years as Netflix grows, if that's a sustainable model. But for now, I really enjoy it because when I sit down at a table, there's no, well, that person's a staff level, that person's an architect, and this person's a junior engineer just started, so their opinion doesn't matter as much. We all have the same weight, and what we say has equal opinion at the table. No one is better than anybody else. So I actually like that. The downside is, yes, there are no junior developers. We're all senior engineers who have experience or are particularly good in our field. So I know not a lot of people like that, but it works well. And Netflix actually only has maybe 2,000, 3,000 engineers. Don't quote me on that. I don't know. But our ratio of engineering to, say, market cap is very, very high compared to other companies because we're pretty efficient at what we do. But part of that is because we're all senior engineers.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that Netflix doesn't hire. Like, there's only one level of. Um, so Denzel, pleased to learn JavaScript. What do you suggest a person to start with and next steps to follow? Because JavaScript is so tedious. Please, thanks.
Well, Denzel, maybe JavaScript is not for you. And I don't mean that in a you can't do it. It may not be the language you're passionate about. So I would say try a lot of things, try different languages, and find the one you're passionate about. For me personally, this is not offense to anybody. I don't like Ruby. I tried Ruby on Rails. I've tried it many times over the years. I don't think it's a pretty language. I think it's kind of ugly. But I'm not insulting anybody. This is my opinion. But if I had started coding doing Ruby, I may or may not be a software engineer today because I'd be like, oh, this isn't for me. So find the language that just makes sense with you, and you'll know. It's like falling in love. Like you can try to force it, but sometimes when it happens, it just clicks, and you're like, oh, yeah, this makes sense, and I understand what the language designers were doing, and I understand how it all comes together. And believe me, when it hits, you will know it, and you'll be like, it all makes sense now. So maybe JavaScript's not your passion. Find the thing that's your passion. Maybe it's not even engineering. Maybe it's product management. Maybe it's design. Maybe it's UX research. There's a lot of fields, so don't feel pressured to be good at one thing just because people say this is what you need to be. Like, be whatever you want. As we said in the beginning, tech is a very broad industry with room for everyone.
I think that's a great point to end the call and session on. Yeah, it is a very broad industry, and if there's a language and technology that you're not passionate about or interested in, there's a lot to pick from. There's a lot to pick from. So find your interest, find where you're interested in learning, and then cultivate it. Don't try to replicate what someone else is doing.
Yeah, well said.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining. Jem, really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a very busy person. Again, just really, really grateful. Any last minute resources that you'd like to share with the group?
Do I have any resources? I mean, I'll plug Front End Masters. I am an instructor on there, but I vouch for the quality of all the instructors on there. They're all people with real world experience that generally work at big tech companies, small tech companies, but they're all personally vetted by the CEO and the CTO. So I really, Front End Masters is probably my favorite platform. And don't get hung up on FOMO, fear of missing out on Twitter. Remember, Twitter and social media is people's highlight reels, and they're only showing you the finished product. They're not showing you all the work that went into it. So it's easy to get dejected when you see people building this really great stuff, and you're thinking, well, I can't even get my career off the ground. Sometimes you just need to get off Twitter. But yeah, other than that, resources, I think Mintbean's a great resource. I really can't stress the importance of community enough and taking advantage of the resources out there. There's literally nothing stopping you from being in my position or any position that you want to be. It's just if you put in the work and you have the right connections and the motivation and the discipline, you will get there. I promise you will get there.
Thank you for that. All right, guys. Thank you for joining. Really appreciate it. Take care. Enjoy your day.
See you.
Bye.